Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Daryl Urbanski, your host as always. And today we are joined by Mark Murphy. And Mark is a New York Times bestselling author, leadership expert, and dynamic speaker. As founder of Leadership IQ, Mark has trained thousands of companies worldwide through practical strategies rooted in groundbreaking research. His influential books, Hiring for Attitude, 100 Percenters, and Hard Goals, equip leaders with actionable insights for immediate impact. Featured in Forbes, Fast Company, and the Wall Street Journal, Mark has shared his expertise with global leaders at Harvard, Microsoft, MasterCard, and even the United Nations. So I've asked Mark to join us here today to share his story plus fresh thinking on leadership, motivation, and achieving peak performance. So Mark, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you?
Daryl, thanks for having me. It's
Yeah,
to be here.
good. It's good to have you here. So now, before we get into a lot of this stuff, I always like to ask about sort of your origin story. Before we get into what you're doing now and your research and your books, how did you even get started in this? Is this something your parents were really big into? Is this something that they were about and you just picked up the torch and carried it forward?
So the funny thing is I actually was so a lot of my work today, just to set the stage, deals with going out and studying, what makes great leaders better than everybody else, and then translating that stuff into training. And the way I got started in this was on the research side, but in a slightly different area.
Hmm.
So I got started working in healthcare and looking at healthcare operations and things like mortality and morbidity rates. And the thing that I always loved, in addition to the speaking, the teaching, and all that, was the research side of it. And so the first study that sort of professionally put me on the map was taking a look at hospitals that cut costs. And what we discovered was that hospitals that cut costs by just doing mass layoffs, like, lay off all the nurses, had like a 300% increased likelihood of increasing mortality and morbidity rates. Basically, if you went to a hospital that was doing layoffs of nurses, there was a significantly higher chance that more patients were going to die. And and that was really where I won't
Wow.
say that's where I first caught the research bug, but that's where I first kind of went professionally. You know what? This is what I want to spend my time doing. Anything I do, I want to make sure that I've got some data behind it because if you look hard enough, and I'm not saying it's always easy to find, but if you look hard enough, there is an answer there somewhere.
Hmm.
And if you can figure out the answer, well, then now you've got something really useful and important to teach people. And
Hmm.
so that's kind of how I got into it. And then, I eventually stopped working exclusively with healthcare organizations and said, okay, well, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing now is, applicable to others. Sort of classic entrepreneur kind of mindset, right? At that point, the company I was working for had elevated up and was running a good chunk of the company, and we sold it to a $20 billion healthcare conglomerate. And I lasted about 12 months um, before I told my wife, yeah, no, I can't do this. This environment, this, huge bureaucracy, the
Mm-hmm.
multiple layers I have to get through. This is not going to work. And I pretty much knew that at the first meeting I had at their headquarters that this was I needed to go do my own thing.
Hmm. 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 That sounds like quite a humbling experience, I imagine.
It was I remember this first meeting and I was talking to the head of, probably, I don't know, 3 billion of the 20 billion. And, saying, okay, now that you've acquired us, here's all the cool things we can do. And here's the rollout, blah, blah, blah. And he looks me dead in the eyes and he goes, Mark, I have to tell you that people that get that aggressive here don't last very long. And this was in the 90s. And I didn't honestly even remember if I had a cell phone at that point, but I got out. it got out of this meeting, got to a private office, called my wife and said, this is going to be hell.
Mhm.
Like the amount of wine it is going to take to get me through this next 12 months. Like I've committed to them that I'm going to help you find my replacement to take over this division.
Mm.
I'm done. Like this is not going to work. And and for the better, right? There are
Right.
some people that's the great environment for them, and others like, listen, I want to go write the books I want to write. I want to do the studies I want to do.
Yeah.
And that annoys somebody. Okay, well, fair
Well,
enough.
but
But
I find
it,
the people that build a company aren't necessarily the ones that scale it and run it, right? It's almost like different skill sets. The
yep.
builder comes and builds it, and they've got a vision and a dream, and they're trying to solve something. They strike gold, they hit pay dirt, they tap the well, and it's going. But that's where they're at, and their focus is on that. But now, depending on like, I forget who it was. There's like someone like J.P. Morgan or one of the steel barons said most entrepreneurs are like, they just want to keep laying down new railroad track. Where I just want to lay down a length of track between two cities and keep it busy 24 hours a day. And that's sort of the different. And that's good and bad. Some people I want to do this thing. This is what I am. This is what I am. I just want to do it. Meanwhile, a part of what you've done can be really valuable for a lot of the world, but you have to just stop building, so to speak, and just focus on spreading. You know what I mean? Like I call it the
Yep.
black box theory. That for a lot of people, their goal in business is to create a black box. And it's if you take a dentist office, it's this magical black box. And I come in on one side crying about my teeth and in pain. And I go into the black box and the magic happens. I go on the other side and I got this beautiful smile and I'm happy. And then if you've built a black box, your job is to save the world essentially from this pain by putting as many people through your black box as you can. But some people, they're just obsessed with the building of I built this great black box and I could build another one and another one and another one. So that makes perfect sense to me on that. So what were some of the biggest challenges then? I mean, obviously that's a bit of a victory. It was a challenging experience for you in terms of that 12 months, but once you were relieved of that, I imagine to a certain extent, it must have been kind of liberating.
Very much so. And you know, uh, again, going back to the research, the research part of this has just been it's where everything starts for me. And if it's a product, if it's one of my books, everything in one form or another begins with a study. And some of the challenges early on were, well, number one, if you're going to do um, a study I did, for example, that got I think it ended up getting me 4 or 5 CNN appearances, was a study called Why CEOs Get Fired. Now, we interviewed about 1,200 board members about why they really fired the CEO. Because, normally they give some, PR speak about, well, it's, mutual opportunities and mutual separation, blah, blah, blah. So we went digging, and it wasn't the money, it wasn't profitability that was the overriding factor why CEOs get fired. It was usually things like mismanaging a change effort. Like, the company is stagnant, or you're pushing them too hard and people are revolting, or tolerating low performers. Like you have cronyism on your executive team. You got a CFO that is your best bud and
Mm,
performing, and they're taking you down. And hosts of other issues, but they were all kind of soft issues. And so it was one of those things where I was so proud of the study. And then, do the study, and then I stop and I go, now, okay, how am I going to make money off
right,
of that? like,
right.
how does one monetize a study where the central premise is here's all the reasons why CEOs get fired? It's not necessarily the best pitch to call a
Right.
CEO and say, hey, hire us.
Yeah.
And so there have been times throughout my career where I've made the decision. That one was, it was an eye-opening one. But there have been other times where I've looked at a study and said, I just think it's an important thing to get out there. I don't know that we'll be able to monetize it, but I
Hmm.
don't care
Right.
uh, because I think it's worth it. But then other studies, coming out of the CEO study, um, the wasn't the immediate next, but shortly after that, I did a study on why new hires fail. And that I did actually figure out how to monetize that one. The study Why New Hires Fail turned into the book Hiring for Attitude, which then launched an entire training program and consulting.
Mm.
So there were times, my general rule has been, it's not that I'm not going to mess something up. It's just, if I mess it up, can I learn something so I don't mess it up the same way the next time? Okay.
Mm.
So, why CEOs got fired? Great study, loved it. Um, Not the world's best monetization, but then why new
Well, it's
hires
tough to
fail.
find a buyer for that. I guess that's the thing. The research, like who wants to know? The CEOs maybe want that. I had a I had a client. I'm not going to say which language, but they had a dating advice kind of company, and it translated to English. One of the things that we learned was translated to English. The company name that they'd chosen was How to Conquer a Man. And one of the things they realize is that women don't want that showing up on their credit card statement. They don't want boxes and packages to the house showing up with that. They don't want their friends and family seeing they're getting emails from that. So I mean, it was a successful business by all regards, but so why CEOs get fired? I guess that's sort of the same problem. Like you don't want someone that's kind of what makes it a tough sell.
Exactly. It's one of those that if you see it, if I had turned that one into a book, it's one of those ones where um, it doesn't look great on a
Yeah,
bookshelf.
right,
Whereas, and that's you, I mean, you raised such a huge point because that was one of the major lessons when I wrote Hiring for Attitude. Yeah, it was based on the study Why New Hires Fail. But Why New Hires Fail also doesn't look good on a bookshelf.
right.
Whereas Hiring for Attitude looks great on a bookshelf.
Mm,
And that's one that you can be absolutely proud to say, yes, we hire for attitude.
yeah,
But, nobody's going to be proud to say, I have mastered why new hires fail. It's just,
right.
it doesn't have the same, um,
It's not
status.
sexy. It's not
Yeah,
sexy that way.
exactly. And it's not going to make the reader of it, it may help them immeasurably, but it's not going to make them look good as
Right.
well. Where hiring for attitude makes you look good.
Yep.
Or, another one of my books was 100%ers, makes you look good. Or, my book coming out in the fall is called Team Players. All right, makes you look good. Whereas some of the other things, yeah, the ones with the more negative titles, the ones that explain the problem, it can work as a study, but that was kind of one of the big lessons is that something like why new hires fail or why CEOs get fired, that was going to have to be completely 180 degrees turned around if it was ever going to be
Yeah.
a
You're
product.
reminding me of something someone said that photos of beautiful smiles sell more dentist work than photos of ugly smiles does or do. And I guess that's sort of it. People want to see, so you have to figure, but in order to give them the beautiful smile, you have to know the problem, be able, it's almost like you have to go to that dark place, but you have to have the map to how to get out there. And then you have to talk about paradise. And then you kind of reach the people that are in the dark place and you're just showing them the light, so to speak. And like moths to a flame, they'll kind of flutter to get out. Is that, yeah?
Yes, such a good way to put it. And that's one of those things I wish I had, you know, known that lesson 25 years ago. But that's the thing is that, it's the people who have the ugly teeth, the teeth falling out, whatever, they're aware of the pain. They understand the pain they're in. What they're looking for is that solution to it. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you can show some of the teeth falling out, here's a secret cause of tooth decay that you didn't know about.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa, okay, great. That can capture attention
Mm-hmm.
and that can make you go, holy mackerel, I did not know. Oranges cause tooth decay? I'm making that up. I don't know that
Mm-hmm.
that's true. But let's just pretend that there was actual research that it turned out that like naturally occurring sugars. Oh my gosh. Okay, that would get huge attention, but nobody's going to buy the anti-orange tooth decay solution. You're
Right.
going to turn that into, something that protects you, that allows you to eat any fruit you want and have beautiful teeth. You're going to your point, you're going to have to turn that 180 degrees the other direction. And I mean, at least that's what I found with turning our studies into books and then training and products and all of that. That's what we had to do.
I love that. So it's almost like the engineering process, like brainstorm, research, prototype, final build. So you would brainstorm some of the biggest problems people might be facing. You'd actually do the research to identify if it was a problem or not and how to solve it. And then you would have some sort of prototype project or program to fix it. And then the final build, I guess, is do you launch the book before you've got the final training package done, or are you finishing the training and all that with a beta group or two before? Like, what's the sort of, I mean, now you've probably done this so many times. You've got this like, almost like an assembly line, but can you speak to that at all, that process?
Yeah. And so what I will say is that it is actually varied from book to book and topic to topic. So with something like hiring for attitude, for example, it was research first, then we had to figure out how to actually fix the problem.
Mm,
And once we had figured out how to fix the problem and actually how do you hire for attitude, and then we had that all working. So we had the research, we had all the
mm,
articles around it, we had the product, the training, the consulting. Then we were able to take that and I said, okay, now I can crank this out into a
mm,
book.
mm,
And so that's why, that book was one of my best sellers, but it only took me 3 months to write because so much of it had,
been done.
yeah, it was already in my head. It's
Yeah.
all I had to do was sit my butt down and, crank
Yeah.
out work. Whereas there are other ones that have taken me a year, 2 years of thinking about because it was while like it started with the idea for a book, and then I'm like, well, I don't actually know what I would put in there.
Mm,
And
mm,
so
mm,
now I got to go figure it out. So to your question, I think it's a great question because in real life, in reality, the way it generally works is the research, there's something interesting, a nugget of an idea. The research leads to some kind of solution, and then get that working. And we figure out that, okay, this is the best way to do it. And then it gets turned into a book. But sometimes, once in a while, it will actually start with the idea for the book. But then I still have to go through this process because I get the idea for the book, like the
mm,
player's book. I had the idea for that book, 15 years ago, something like that. And it was before so many of the other books I actually wrote. And I realized that I didn't have it all figured out. Like I had this nugget of an idea, but I didn't have it all figured out. So I actually kind of set it to the side and worked on all of these other projects and training and books and all that. And only really came back to it a year ago, year and a
mm,
half ago. And it's because I knew that I was going to have, for me, and this is not everybody's like this.
mm.
Me, my comfort zone is if I know that what I'm doing is based on some data, it is so much easier
Yeah.
for me. I feel so much more comfortable and I can move really quickly. Whereas if I'm just kind of making up an idea, there have been a few times in my life where I've thought, ooh, I should write like, business fiction. And, like some murder mystery occurs in a consulting office and, who killed the guy and what? And I'm like, no, that's not
Right.
really what I do because I start with, if I have some data and then I can turn that into training and consulting, then I can wrap all of that into a book. That's how I work best. That's what's easiest for me to do. And so, that even if I have a nugget of an idea, I mean, truly, I think it was at least 15 years ago that the team players book idea that I had that. And so, I mean, that has literally sat there for quite some time because
Right,
I
right, right.
it took me a long time to kind of get back around to it.
Yeah. So from your data that you've done, what are some of the most important skills and behaviors in business?
So, a couple of things stand out. Number one is that let me take them in kind of a couple hyper practical things. So number one, I'll start with the hiring for attitude one, since this is a big deal if you are trying to build a business. A lot of new hires fail, almost half, 46% will fail. But when they fail, 89% of the time, it's for their attitudes. Only 11% of the time is it for their skills. Now, this raises a host of issues. Number one is that most business owners and hiring managers in general, they hire from a place of, holy crap, I need a butt in a seat quickly. I have a deficit. I have a something that isn't getting done in the
Mm-hmm.
company. I need
Mm-hmm.
that position filled yesterday. Okay, fair enough. However, what that leads to is knee jerk reactions of this person has the skills, they worked at a company I've heard of before, let me
Mm-hmm.
grab them, without ever asking the question, does this person have the attitudes of somebody that I can work with, or
Mm-hmm.
the attitudes of somebody that I cannot work with?
Mm-hmm.
And, and part of that is one, having the discipline to hire and not slow your hiring process down, but be regimented in your hiring, because you can still hire quickly.
Right.
Hiring for attitude, you just have to pay attention to that issue. But another issue that it raises, and this is another critical leadership characteristic, is self awareness and the ability to be brutally honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
um, I am not the best manager of every person. I am a great manager in my own business for a certain kind of person. But there are other kind of people I am not the best fit. If there is, for example, if somebody is highly emotive and what they need is the ability to use the F word, feel on a daily basis, I am not the guy who
Right.
is going to be the most effective manager of said person. Now, I can help companies hire those people, but personally, being brutally honest,
Yeah.
that is not my sweet spot. and
Yeah.
and that's one of the things I see with leaders sometimes is they want to put on airs. They want to, I can, be everything to everybody. And no,
Mm-hmm.
you have a sweet spot. You have something, an area where you're really good, where you really shine. You have a particular kind of person that you're really good at managing. You have particular kinds of, situations that you're
Mm-hmm.
really good at managing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think of you raised this point earlier, Daryl, about some founders versus CEOs. Listen, there are people that are great at building things and they are
Yep.
great at getting you out of a fire,
Yep.
but they are just as likely to put you into the fire because they do not have the mindset to just, go in every day and keep the trains running. They're like, no, forget this. I want to build more track.
Right.
And it's that kind of brutal honesty. And you see this sort of delusion with CEOs oftentimes. So they'll be, oh, I could take over that situation. You're like, could you
Yeah.
really?
Yep.
Um,
Yep. Yep.
and you see somebody get hired, at a big company, for example, and they're just a terrible fit. It's like, listen, you are a regimented financial disciplinarian, and you are going into an environment. I remember when um, Bob Nardelli uh, left GE, so this is back in the day, right? Jack Welch retires, and there are three people in the running to take over CEO of GE. Bob Nardelli is one of the three. and he doesn't get this GE job. So he leaves, takes over as CEO of Home Depot. And he is a financial disciplinarian. He is brilliant with financials and tight operations and all of that. And he goes to Home Depot, where the founders of Home Depot at one point famously said, "We make love to our customers." And it's all about we wear our orange, we love it. It's about the feeling and the vibes and all of this. And so you take this ruthlessly efficient financial disciplinarian and put him in a company where we make love to our customers.
Mm-hmm.
You could see this train wreck coming a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended like you would imagine it would end. But this happens all the time. So, hiring for attitude, one of the reasons I love it is that it opens up this whole other world of what does it take to be a great hirer? Well, it takes brutal honesty with yourself. It takes a willingness to ask some difficult questions. It takes a willingness to not be panicked and grab for the first butt in the seat, not grab for the first person that has the resume that you need, but actually push and ask yourself for real, is this going to be a good fit? And a fourth characteristic that I do find is important is that, and this goes to the issue of bias, we as humans, we are all biased in 100 different ways. But one of the biases that infects all of us is confirmation bias. We seek out things that
Mm-hmm.
reinforce what we think we know and reinforce the way we like to do it. And if you're really being brutally honest with yourself, not only about where you shine and the kind of people that are going to work for you, but also being brutally honest with yourself about if I made a bad hire, and let's be honest, every one of us has, anyone who has ever hired people, myself included, I literally wrote the book Hiring for Attitude, and trust me, I have made bad hires, ironically, because I got cocky and I thought, well, I wrote the book. I should be able to do this. I don't need to follow the stinking script. And I ended up making some of the dumbest mistakes I've ever made. Uh, and being willing to hold ourselves accountable to like a
Mm-hmm.
protocol and say, listen, none of us is so good that we ever should stop learning.
Mm-hmm.
None of us is so good that we should ever stop following the script or following
Mm-hmm.
the following the process. And it's it's hard to admit, but as a guy who literally sometimes invents those processes and those scripts and the research, to go, yeah, my dumbest mistakes have been where I got cocky
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, I wrote the book. I don't have to follow it. No, you do. It doesn't
Right.
matter how good you get.
Yep.
We still have to discipline ourselves. And what that starts to do is it makes you analyze, how did I miss that warning sign? It's obvious in hindsight, but how did I miss it? Well, one of the reasons I missed it is I confirmation bias. I went looking
Mm-hmm.
at all the things I thought I knew, all
Mm-hmm.
my favorite interview questions, even though research would suggest they're stupid and don't work.
Right.
I have my pet processes, and I'm just looking for people that kind of fit my preconceived notions. And
Mm.
reality is that the best leaders are ones that are willing to have their preconceived notions challenged. And it
Yeah.
doesn't happen every day, but yeah, being willing to hear an idea that's a bit uncomfortable, where
Yep.
you go, oh, I
Well,
really,
and
I really
I think part of it comes from the fact that, you know, you as the owner or even as the hiring manager, you have a certain skill set. Like you said, you have your own zone of genius, so to speak, and things that you're good at. And so when you hire someone, you try to make a judgment of the other person, but you're judging them from, like you mentioned, your own biased view of someone who's good with these skills. And it's so hard. I really learned this when I lived in Japan, because I remember before I left to Japan, I felt my friends were like, oh, what about culture shock? And I was like, culture shock, schmulture shock. we all have skin and hair and hearts and mothers, team humanity. And then after living in Japan for a year and a half, I mean, I'm Canadian. We're known as the friendly people. And it took me a year and a half to realize how I was offending people on a daily basis without even knowing it, just by being a bumbling foreigner in their country. Like it took me like 18 months. That's what I'm saying. Like just to realize how, like, here's a simple example. Like I remember I went to this international grocery store once. I wanted to get some mango chutney. And I asked the lady, I couldn't find it. I usually have it on the shelf. There was none. So I go to the lady at the counter. I'm like, mango chutney, arimasu ka? Like, do you have some mango chutney? And the lady at the counter said, oh, well, now's a little, she was like, ima wa chotto. And I was, the culture, I'm supposed to interrupt and be like, you know what? I'm actually short on time. I'm going to go and let her save face. But I'm a Westerner. I was like, what? You're a little what? It's just too set. Like, what? Do you have it? Is it in the back? I need to come back next week. And she was like starting to, and I'm like, what's going on here? And she was like sweating and just and I'm like, what's going on? And at one point she was like looking around. She's like, nine. And like was so shocked that she had been so direct with me. But this is an example where you have different butts and seats and positions, have different skill sets. And those people, those skill sets, and to enjoy that work requires different Piccadilly, not Piccadilly, but certain peculiarities about the personality. Mm-hmm. So it's such a foreign thing for you as the hiring manager, as the owner, to know the right role. And I that's what I was feeling and thinking when you were saying that. I was thinking about in Japan and how people don't understand the different culture of someone that has to be. And so you hire for yourself and people like you, but you don't need another you. You need someone very different. And how do you know whether you found that person? Is that a fair statement?
Yes. And you can even take that one step further, which is I see companies, they'll come to me all the time and say, in the book, you talked about like Southwest, for example. We want to hire people like that. Like, no, you don't, because you're not them. They're them. Apple and Google are both great companies, but their cultures are totally different from each other. You don't want to hire what they hire at Apple. You don't want to hire what they hire at Southwest or the Ritz Carlton, or take your pick, because your culture is unique. You're different, and we're not all the same.
Yep.
And, what flies in one organization is absolutely not. I remember one time I was talking to a senior exec at Southwest, and she was telling me about they were hiring essentially, it doesn't sound good when you say it, but they were talking about ramp rats, so the guys and gals that work on the ramps of the planes and, and bring the ramps out to the plane and all that. Anyways, she was telling me that they were having fun one day and, and they had all these interviews scheduled, but they also had just some fun. So they had all these like t-shirts made up for like the ramp operations and the baggage handling and all that. And so they're just having a blast. And this woman, she's, SVP at Southwest. She has, they're like those, I'm going to sound so old when I say pantyhose, like those stocking, like fake tattoo sleeves that you put on. So it makes it look like your entire arm is covered in tattoos. They're like stockings, but like have fake tattoos. So she had these on, right? And so she looks like she's covered in tattoos because she has these fake, like, stocking things on her arms. And she goes into the bathroom at one point, and there's one of the candidates is in there, and so this exec is standing at the sink with this candidate, and the candidate like looks over at her and is like, gives this nasty look like, ugh, that's disgusting, like all covered in tattoos. And she doesn't say anything, but she just gives like this disgusted look. And then like 10 minutes later, this candidate is in with this SVP going through the interview, and she walks in like, oh, jaw drops. And it's like, listen, wearing like the fake tattoo sleeves with like a Ramp Rats t-shirt is not cool at the Ritz Carlton, but at Southwest Airlines, that is them. That's totally their vibe. Now, maybe this person who was interviewing, this woman who was interviewing, maybe she would have been great for like, I don't know, Singapore Airlines
Right.
or Emirates or British Airways, but as bad a fit for Southwest as you
Right.
could possibly imagine.
Yeah. You said the word culture. I think that's really important because there's the culture of the company, but there's also the culture of their primary market. I think that's a really important thing to mention as well. Like there are riches and niches, bitches, and every business kind of caters to a different niche. And that community has its own culture and vibes. So it's almost it's the whole this brings up the religion question. Like if I was trying to kind of if I, I'm 41, I'll be 42 soon. If I needed to somehow embed myself in the culture of teenagers in the city that I'm in, I would have to approach them and behave differently to be accepted by that culture than if I were to do that with business professionals my age in the same city. So to the same extent, when you're talking about a business that serves a different niche, there's the culture of the company for sure, but there's also the culture of the consumer. And there has to
Yeah.
be a matchmaking between the two. And I think that's part of why that culture is such an important drum to be beaten. One, because you want, certain, I think everybody, and they say, was it likable, reliable, and teachable are the core three things that every company's looking for. They want you to be likable because you got to work with everybody else here. You got to be teachable because we got to train you. And even if you're a surgeon, every hospital does things a little different. And the person training you has their own to-do list. So you got to pick up fast. And then reliable because nobody wants to hire someone to not be there when you need them. And so those are the core three. But then beyond that, like you're talking about, attitude is so important because there's going to be gaps and there's going to be a culture fit that has to happen. And then again, it's not even just with the company; it's with producing the final result for the consumers. I'm sort of talking this out loud while I go through your thing. I don't know. I'm assimilating it because I think it's a really important, really powerful thing. Do you feel that there's any um, key habits that are critically important for leaders, whether they're daily, weekly, monthly?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of big ones that stand out. Number one, and this will go back to rules that we're told, whether we learned them or not in childhood, but we were pretty much in one form or another told these things, but there is no real substitute for conversation. And in conversation, you at a minimum have to spend 50% of the time listening. If you're conducting a job interview, it should be 90% of your time should be listening. But if you're having a one-on-one conversation with a customer, an employee, what have you, it needs to be at least 50% of the time is listening. And this is something that we will actually do transcript analyses and actually record executives. For example, if I'm working with a CEO, one of the things I'll do is we'll just record a conversation they're having with maybe a key customer, key executive, a board member, whatever. And then we'll go back and we'll analyze what percent of the time did you spend talking? Like if there were 10,000 words uttered in this conversation, how many thousands of those words did you account for? Because if you accounted for 7,000 of those 10,000 words,
Right.
we, there's a big difference between making a presentation
Mm-hmm.
and having a conversation. It's good to be a good presenter. I love that. That's great. But that's a totally different thing than being willing to have a conversation where
Mm-hmm.
you are actually going to ask as many questions as you make statements. That's just
Mm-hmm.
how normal conversations go, too. The other day I was walking outside and I saw my next door neighbor and like, hey, how you doing? Good. How are you doing? Good. Hey, did you watch the game the other night? Yeah. Well, what do you think? I don't know. I'm not rooting for them. What about you? You going to the Final Four? I don't know. Maybe. What about you? Have you thought about it? Like, that's just, a stupid, inane conversation that one
Right.
has with a neighbor. But if you analyze it, like, how you doing? Good. How about you? Okay, question, statement, question. You going to the game? No. Question, statement. No. How about you? Question. And it's like this back and forth. Normal
Yep.
conversations
Yep.
have a nearly 50-50 split of questions versus statements. And it's one of those things that once you start to pay attention to yourself and how you're sounding and what you're saying, it becomes a much easier habit to develop, but it because it really does start with the awareness that
Mm.
And it is one, for as many downsides as occurred with the pandemic, one thing that occurred that was positive, and I know we all get Zoom fatigue and everything else, but one positive of that is the transcripts you have immediate
Yeah.
access to
Yep.
allow you to perform instant analyses
Yep.
on how you sound and how you interact.
Yep.
And this was truly something, when we were doing these studies 10 years ago, we had we had statistical software that was tens of thousands of dollars, and we had to pay so much money in recording fees and transcription fees. Now the amount of money we don't have to pay
Right.
because we're instant generating transcripts
Yeah.
and analyze every word you say
Yep.
virtually all day long between AI and auto generated transcripts, which are generally AI anyways. And like, okay,
Yeah.
the
It's
what we're
powerful.
able to do scientifically in looking at leadership behaviors is light years
It's
from
so
where it
powerful.
was.
It's even just market research. I mean, before you'd have to, if you wanted to run a survey, you'd have to have people with clipboards and it'd all be on paper, and then you'd have to tally it, and you got boxes and boxes of paperwork you're doing. Now you're sitting on the toilet with this like with this supercomputer in your palm, and you're just like searching what 1,000 people said on Reddit about this talk. Like it's just if people don't get how easy it's never been easier than it is today to get this stuff done. It is life on easy mode in a lot of respects. Of course, there's still challenges. Now, I want to ask, where do you think the future of all this is going? I mean, if you fast forward 5 years, even 10 years of the way business is being done per se, and the way people are, because there's a lot happening. We're having a lot of technological disruptions. There's a lot happening geopolitically, and even with the demographics of the planet. How do you see, what are you paying attention to over the next 5, 10 years? What do you have your finger on the pulse of?
One thing that I'm seeing that there's still very much a need for is organizations that can connect with people and build buy-in for change are going to still, they've always had a leg up, but it's going to be even more of a leg up because while there's the technological disruption and all of that, and companies can move faster, but companies can also get slowed down significantly when they do not have people aligned, bought in. When there is unrest, when there is uncertainty, humans don't react particularly well
Mm-hmm.
when they are scared.
Right.
Humans are not
Mm-hmm.
the smartest animals when we are scared.
Mm-hmm.
And the fear doesn't have to be thermonuclear war. The fear could simply be, am I going to have my job? Well, you know, when people feel that fear, they don't move as fast, they don't move as well. And so there's still going to be a premium for companies who can get a decent level of buy-in. It doesn't, it's never going to be universal. It's never going to be land of unicorns and poppy seeds and whatever. There's always going to be something. There's always going to be uncertainty, but the companies that do the best job of making that human connection are still going to be better. And even with AI, for example, we still see that as universal as AI is, we haven't scratched the surface of what AI can do in terms of being integrated into our daily lives and
Mm-hmm.
businesses. I mean, we've done research on this, and there are other studies on the same topic that find that there's a lot of people, some 50% plus in the business world, that still view ChatGPT and other tools like it as essentially kind of a trinket, a gizmo, a toy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're better words, but pick whatever. Where they see it as kind of a fun little thing, but they don't really understand its power. And there was some research, it wasn't done by us, but that I saw a couple of weeks ago that this one study was looking at, they're actually seeing incidences where people are subtly almost sabotaging AI implementation because they're afraid for their jobs, because they see AI taking over their jobs. Well, listen, who's going to get better results? The company that has told their employees, yeah, guess what? Here's the reality. AI is going to take away part of the work you're currently doing, but we are going to skill you up, help you grow so you can take on even better, cooler work.
Right.
Or the company that says, hey, suck it up, start using the AI, and if you don't, you're fired. And
Right.
oh, by the way, if you use the AI, you're probably fired anyways. Like, which of those two companies is going to get better
Yeah.
results? And that's something I think that so long as we have the human variable in this equation, there's always going to be a place for people who are good
Mm.
at that, who can
No, for sure.
effectively, manage the human side of things.
100%. I agree with that in terms of on a couple of things. One, in The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith discusses the specialization of work and how, I think the example in the book is making pins and how like 1 to 4 people can maybe make 40 pins a day, but a team of 10 people can do 4,000. And it's because of the specialization of work increases output at the end of the day. And a lot of these jobs wouldn't have been available without this prior specialization that came before them. There's entire jobs that wouldn't exist without the specialization of the people that predated them. And we've been saying the robots are going to replace humans forever. When tractors came out, we're not going to need farmers. When calculators came out, we're not going to need accountants and bookkeepers and mathematicians. When spreadsheets came out, we're going to replace whole accounting departments with spreadsheets now. QuickBooks. Nobody needs a CPA anymore. We got QuickBooks. But all it really does is it gives the productive people, it makes them more productive, and the non-productive people, it gets rid of the excuse they can't hide in a corner taking 3 days to do 2 + 2 = 4. They have to retrain, upskill, and move on to something else. And I really personally, not that you asked, but hey, it's my podcast. I don't really believe that we're creating a sentient life yet, because a lot of it is statistical. There's 2 reasons. One, a lot of AI is algorithms and training to produce a statistically likely output. That's what all these LLMs, language learning models, are now. You feed it 10 billion conversations and go, okay, based off of this data, if I say she sells seashells, complete the sentence, and it predicts what the answer would be. And that's what you're getting, is the prediction of what it would be based off of that, off of searching the web and being able to read files. The other part, which I think is really fascinating, and this is almost like becomes a spiritual thing. I don't know. Have you seen the moment when a sperm conceives an egg? There's a flash of light. Scientists say it's a release of zinc. I actually have the video I keep it on my laptop. I was so shocked when I saw that. There is a legitimate flash of light around the egg once the sperm is entered and the two are like bonded. And scientists say it's a release of zinc. But until we can show the release of zinc that creates sentient consciousness, I feel like all these AI things are just tools. They're just tools. We're already cyborgs. You and I are talking using ones and zeros from different sides of the planet and a microphone. None of this is real. And I just personally see AI as that. It's just a really powerful tool. But I don't necessarily think that we've created new life. I'm not on that bandwagon, because we just don't know at this point. And it just seems a little far-fetched on that part. But I found that so empowering to know that you have a spark. Like, Mark, you literally, the whole, like, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it, like, there is literally, like, you started with a flash of light, which I think is so powerful and so amazing. And you can look at, they see these in fertility clinics all over the world. When they put the egg, they put in flash of light. Like, it's a repeatable, it's undeniable. I just think that's, I think we're never going to give up driving the bus, and AI is just the bus. That's it. It's the tool. Yeah. You're never going to let go of the steering wheel and be like, okay, whatever. So I think what you said is great. Mark, this has been a great call. I got a page of notes here. I got other things I want to ask you about too, but I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything I haven't asked you yet that I should have asked you?
I mean, you've had so many great questions and we covered so many different topics. I think, the one of the things I will just say isn't a question you didn't ask, but it is a
Sure.
reason for a podcast like yours is one of the ironies of this, and this has been shown in study after study after study. There was one study done where people were asked to take emotional intelligence tests. And at the end of everybody taking these emotional intelligence tests, they were given free emotional intelligence training and books and all this stuff. And it was worth like hundreds of dollars, right? So, okay, you go through the study, you take the emotional intelligence test, and then you get a gift bag of like, emotional intelligence stuff. Here's the thing, the people that had the highest emotional intelligence scores were 10 times more likely to take the free training and books and stuff than the people with the lowest emotional intelligence scores. Meaning that the people who are already good are the ones more likely to actually keep learning and keep growing and keep doing more cool stuff. And so, one of the things I love about talking to somebody like you is the people who are listening to your podcast are almost by definition selecting in to say, I want to go learn more. I'm the kind of person that is like the high scorers on the emotional intelligence test where I'm going to grab more stuff. Oh, you find me more interesting people to learn from? I'm going to go listen to that. I'm going to go listen to this next thing and learn this new stuff. And that's, to your point about the AI and, all of the times we've thought that, the best people were going to get replaced by QuickBooks or Excel or whatever. No, there's always going to be a place for people that are in that learning mode that I want to keep growing and developing. People like who are listening to us right now, listen to your podcast on the regular. Those are the people that are going to be successful because it's kind of, the irony is they're already successful and
Yeah.
they're going to keep doing the things that got them successful, and that's going to make them even more successful.
Yeah.
Whereas the person who totally flubbed the emotional intelligence test is like, no, I don't want more training. Dude needs it, but
Yep.
that's just how the world works.
How it works. And I don't think we're going to run out of problems. I think that that's just everything leads to a new set of problems, which needs new thinking to solve that problem. And so for people that are interested in learning more, for people that do want to find out more and want to upgrade their skills and knowledge, what are some of the best ways for them to reach out and learn about what you're doing?
If you head to our website, leadershipiq.com, there's, of course, you can, go buy the books like Hiring for Attitude, etc. You can find those on Amazon. But if you go to leadershipiq.com, there is an area on our website, one called Research, if you want to nerd out with us and see some studies. But there's another area on the site called Quizzes. And if you go there, there's quizzes on leadership styles and communication styles and your organizational culture and what motivates you. There's a dozen different free tests that you can take that will give you some deep insight into how you like to lead, how you like to communicate. There's a ton of personal leadership exploration you can do there as well.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I just checked it out myself. So if you want to see how you score and what you're good at, what you're weak at, go check out leadershipiq.com. That's leadership, leadershipiq.com, leadershipiq.com. You can also check out his book, Hard Goals and Hiring for Attitude. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today, knowing you've got your own followers, your own direct reports, your own clients and customers. Thank you for coming and sharing with my audience and I so we could all do a little bit better.
Thanks so much for having me, Daryl. It was a pleasure.